Good evening and welcome to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum. I'm Graham Allison, Director of the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs here at the Kennedy School, and we're greatly honored to have our guest here tonight for what promises to be a wonderful event. The JFK Jr. Forum has become the premier venue, certainly here at Harvard, and I would say at any university campus, for political discussion and debate. And one of its most distinctive features is the fact that every speaker who speaks here gets a chance to have his or her say, but then is open for questions, unfiltered questions, from the audience. So the contract is, we have one speaker each evening. That speaker gets to give his or her speech, and we listen politely. And then we have a chance to ask our questions, whatever question that we would like to ask, and state it however pointedly, but not a second speech, okay, brief. And the speaker then has a chance to answer the question. If he fails to answer the question, the moderator for the evening will give him a second chance, okay? So those are the ground rules. I want to give thanks to the Institute of Politics for hosting this event tonight, and especially to Rose Styron, who's here, an IOP fellow who succeeded in not only inviting but persuading Gerry Adams to be our guest tonight. And for introducing Gerry, a person who knows him very well and who will serve as the moderator tonight, I want to introduce Ambassador Paula Dobriansky, who's a new senior fellow at the Belfer Center. Now, I've known Paula for a long time and admired her for a long time. Actually, she was a student a long time ago in my course, hard as it's to believe. But she's just come to us from 8 years in the Bush administration, where she was the Undersecretary of State for Democracy and Global Affairs. Paula is the longest serving ever person in that position, having, as I say, spent 8 years there. Her portfolio encompassed a broad range of foreign policy issues, including democracy, human rights, labor, refugee and humanitarian relief matters, and environmental and science matters. She led the U.S. delegation in the international negotiations on a successor to the Kyoto Treaty. She was also designated as Special Coordinator for Tibetan issues and served as the President's Special Envoy on Northern Ireland with the rank of Ambassador. Ambassador Dobriansky received her bachelor's degree at the Georgetown School of Foreign Service, but her PhD here at Harvard. So please join me in welcoming Paula, who will introduce our special guest, Gerry Adams.
Good evening, and thank you so much, and thank you, Dr. Allison. And yes, I was a student of Dr. Allison's. Welcome to all of you to the Institute of Politics Forum, and welcome to you, Gerry. Gerry Adams is the president of the political party Sinn F&, and he also has been a member of Parliament from West Belfast since 1983. And he is acclaimed for continuing efforts to build a stable, democratically negotiated peace settlement in Northern Ireland. With John Hume, leader of the Socialist Democratic Labour Party, Gerry Adams helped revive the peace initiative in 1993. This led to major political developments toward peace, including the Downing Street Declaration, the Joint Framework Document, and the Irish Republican Army's announcement of a complete cessation of military operations in 1994. This ultimately led to the Good Friday Agreement in 1998, which is a very significant and important blueprint for action for the devolution of power in Northern Ireland. I'd also like to mention, you know your political involvement, But also, Gerry Adams is an author. He has authored a number of very significant books that has had a number of different messages. He's written Hope and History, Making Peace in Ireland, A Pathway to Peace, The Politics of Irish Freedom and Selected Writings. I would like to share, though, with you the first occasion I had when I was appointed as Special Envoy to Northern Ireland to interact with Gerry Adams. And that was in January of 2007. On that occasion, as the leader of Sinn Féin, he convened at the end of January a very significant meeting. It's known as the Ardesh, the council meeting of Sinn Féin, and the topic for discussion was to get a consensus and an embracement of policing. His leadership, his conviction led to that embracement in that Ardesh meeting. It was very significant, and it was one of the important factors that contributed in the months ahead to actually, in May of 2007, the devolution of power in Northern Ireland. We have worked together, and through his leadership and commitment to now the devolution of policing and peace and reconciliation in Northern Ireland, it is the pathway forward. Let me say before I welcome him up here to the podium that just yesterday he spoke before the National Press Club, had a press conference. And in that press conference, his message was, in looking at the recent killings, that these must be condemned, that the pathway forward is one of a strong commitment to peace and reconciliation. That was his message yesterday, very clearly and specifically. With that, please join me in welcoming Mr. Gerry Adams.
Thank you. Well, tá mai fíorbuíocht díobse go leor, well, aine an seo as Ireland. Tá anybody here from Ireland? Right, why go leor? That's Corkic. That's sin go mai. Well, lá fiala Padraig we why should díobse? Just remember there are lots of Irish people here. Anybody wanting to ask any questions which are too difficult? and a very, very happy St. Patrick's Day. I think it actually is a St. Patrick's Week here in the United States, so a very... And I want to thank all of you for coming here this evening. It's a great delight to be here. I want to thank the John F. Kennedy School of Government for the invitation to speak, to my friend Rose Starrin, who's here with us, for beguiling me to come back again. Paula for her very kind remarks, and if I may say so, for the very patient and calm way that she ministered her term as Special Envoy. And you always know quite quickly if a person has good heart, and Paula certainly has that, so I want to thank you for your efforts back in our country. And Dr. Graham Allison also for the invitation to be here and for your kind words also. This has been one of those sort of mad few days. I was yesterday in Washington, as someone has said, and before that in New York, and we've had a series of very productive meetings. I had the pleasure yesterday to meet again with President Barack Obama and with Vice President Joe Biden at the Speaker's Lunch, and again in the White House last evening. I hear there are still some Irish people in the White House and refusing to leave. We also had a very good discussion with Senator of State Hillary Clinton and her deputy Jim Steinberg, and both were involved, obviously Hillary with the Clinton administration, but both were involved very heavily in the historic work which President Clinton did when he went into the White House it must have been 16 years ago now. And there were other meetings with congressional leaders and senators, including Richard Neal from this state, who has been a long-standing and very, very steadfast friend of Ireland long before there was a peace process. And the last time I was here speaking in Harvard was in 1994. And I just met, I don't know where she is here, Heather Campton, who greeted us at that time. And she surprised me to tell me that her daughter, who's now 16, Courtney, was 1 year old. So 15 years, time flies when you're enjoying yourself. And these are very different days. So just let me encapsulate, if I may, for those of you who weren't here 15 years ago, what Sinn Féin is about. Sinn Féin is first and foremost an Irish Republican party. Irish Republicanism has its roots, it's a European movement, has its roots in the French Revolution and in the American Revolution. And if it's about anything, it's about citizenship, about citizens' rights, about equality, about fairness. And that means, in the particular circumstances of the island in which I live, that it's about freedom from British rule, it's about the right of our own people to shape out our own destiny, and we would like to see it being a modern, fit-for-purpose, rooted in this century national republic on the entire island. Our big purpose function is to bed down the peace process, to bed it down, to root it, to ensure that the political institutions work, to ensure that the Good Friday Agreement is implemented, to reach out to unionism in that task, but also to reach out to unionism, to make friendships, to try and develop harmonious working relationships with them. And at the same time, in terms of the big picture, to continue the process towards an end to partition and an end to the union with Britain. The last time I came here, the IRA cessation was only a few months old. And I remember at that time, Seamus Heaney had written of this cessation that it was a space in which hope could grow. And I think if we look back over the 15 years, there have been setbacks, yes, there have been difficulties. It's very slow. It's frustratingly difficult. But we're all in a far better place than we were when last I visited here. And I remember that we had a very good discussion, very good, frank exchange. And I suppose, given the stories that were coming out of Ireland up to that point, people could be not blamed if they thought that maybe this wasn't going to work. You know, that not that they didn't want it to work, but just the story of Ireland was of death and distress and difficulty. Well, it has worked. And I think those who took a stand at that time, I would like to think that they would feel vindicated by events as they have developed in the intervening years. Conflict is never intractable. All these problems, wherever they present themselves, are human problems, mostly created by man, but human problems. And therefore, any problem created by human beings can be resolved by human beings, no matter how difficult that may seem. There is never, ever a military solution to problems like the Anglo-Irish one or in the conflicts that we see elsewhere. There can be no military settlement. It's just impossible. You may have a temporary advantage over your opponent or over your enemy, but you cannot resolve the difficulties. So what we had in Ireland was a long military stalemate between, on the one hand, the Irish Republican Army, and on the other hand, the British government. And the peace process grew, not just out of the desire of people to have peace, but out of the very, very clear understanding which Sinn Féin propagated, that there had to be a political alternative to war, that there had to be another way of achieving objectives, that there had to be a peaceful democratic alternative and a way to move forward. The involvement of Bill Clinton was central to us having a peace process when we had one. It is my view that we would have eventually got a peace process, but to have it when we had it would not have happened without that intervention. And for people who maybe feel a wee bit removed from what's happening, how Bill Clinton became involved was that a number of people in New York decided to organize a conference to which they invited the hopefuls in the presidential election. Now, how many times have people here had a good idea, but never actually did anything about it? You know, I mean, people have sitting over a beer or sitting over a coffee or over the dinner table or watching television, and you think, why don't we do this? Or why don't they do that? But in this case, a guy called John Deary decided to organize that conference. The different people came forward. I can't remember who was opposing Bill Clinton, Paula, at that time. Doesn't matter. But he was asked to make, they were asked to make a few commitments. One, to give me a visa. Two, to support measures to end discrimination. Three, to lift the lid on collusion. And in fairness to Mr. Clinton, when he became President Clinton, he returned to those commitments, and the rest is history. So, what does this prove? It proves that peace is possible. It proves that people are prepared to take risks and prepared to be strategic and prepared to put in place alternatives, then that peace can be built. So what is needed is political will, and a lot of tenacity and a lot of determination and a lot of stamina and a lot of long-headed strategic thinking, as well as organisation and what other mechanisms are needed to deliver whatever the strategy happens to be. We also need patience. I mentioned there that our process is tortuously slow. On occasion, it has collapsed completely. But if you look at where we are today, 15 years on, Martin McGuinness is the Deputy First Minister alongside Peter Robinson, and there's now a functioning executive in place in the context of the Good Friday Agreement, with the infrastructure, the All-Ireland and other infrastructure in place. There are a whole series of international and political agreements covering constitutional matters, political matters, equality, social justice, and institutional issues. The Democratic Unionist Party is now working those institutions with us and with the other parties in the North. And for those who aren't familiar with the politics of the Ulster Unionist Party, with the Democratic Unionist Party, it was led for almost 40 years by Ian Paisley, who you may be familiar with, at least by reputation. And it was founded to block civil rights. Its actual core value, as enunciated over the years, was to prevent power sharing, to prevent reform, and to sustain unionist domination in the North. Ian Paisley deserves our gratitude for being the person who did the deal on behalf of unionism, and also for the very graceful, positive, and respectful way that he then honoured the agreement that he made, and I think helped immensely just the atmosphere and the feelings of people who may have been afraid from the unionist position of what was coming. So even though there are difficulties, we do have Martin and Peter Robinson, Ian Paisley's successor, working on the basis of equality. The office of First and Deputy First Minister, they're like Siamese twins. It's the one office. It's the one institution. One cannot do anything without the other agreeing. And while that can cause deadlock, it also allows for positive joined-up partnership. We shouldn't have the impression that everything is easy, because it's not. The DUP will be pleased, if they ever hear what I'm saying, to know that we think it's very hard to work with them. We are parties who have totally opposite views, and there are some fundamentalists within the DUP who are entirely unreconstructed in terms of lots of important issues. But it's far better than what was there before. And as we continue to make progress, you find, just as a result of just the human instinct, that people have more rounded experiences and are starting to get to know each other and starting to develop good working relationships. The issues that are outstanding are over education, over Irish language rights, the need for Act na Gaeilge, which is an act which is required to give Irish speakers very modest legislative expression of their rights. There is an act like that in the Republic in the South, and an act like that in Scotland, and an act like that in Wales, and not yet one in the North. Neither do we have a Bill of Rights, and the Commission on the Bill of Rights just gave their report to the British government about 2 months ago. And there's clearly a lot of work, I don't want to speak for too long on this, in terms of equality. The Good Friday Agreement, its central core is about equality and parity. So there are continuous daily battles just to ensure, and equality is good for everyone. I mean equality is aimed, it's not for Catholics, it's not for Republicans, it's for citizens, it's for everyone, and it's to the benefit of everyone. So we have just, I think Paula alluded to it, just over the last 2 days or so, the British Parliament's two houses cleared the transfer of powers on policing and justice, which was part of the conditional approach which Sinn Féin took at the Ardèche, which she described in her remarks. And hopefully the Assembly in the North, under the leadership of Martin McGuinness and Peter Robinson, will accept that transfer in the upcoming period. They're just back from the West Coast, from California, and these are very grim economic times for everyone, but there's been a very successful trip, and we're hopeful there will be some positive news out of that. And here in the East Coast, Tom DiNapoli, who is the New York State Comptroller, just on Monday announced an inward investment of $30 million. That's after a lot of work by us, with him and with his predecessors, and it's a very, very welcome initiative, and comes on the back of a similar initiative by Bill Thompson in New York City. So all of this is the context in which we should view the attacks of last week. And Sinn Féin has been very robust in asserting that they are wrong, that they have to stop, that they're going against the grain of public and popular opinion. And indeed, there is much an attack upon the political institutions and on Sinn Féin, as they are against those who were killed and injured. And I say that clearly and distinctly, and I say it not just here in Harvard or in Washington, but in the streets of Belfast. We now have in place a political and democratic way forward. We have a political and democratic way to achieve Republican objectives. When we didn't have that, and I make no apologies for this, and I hope I did it in a rational and reasonable way, defended the use of armed actions against British occupation, because that's what we had, and because there was no alternative for anyone who wanted to make progress on any of the normal rights issues which press down upon people. But those days are gone. And let there be no equivocation, ambiguity, ambivalence about this. If anybody is concerned that this is the start of the Troubles again, that we're going to slip back into war again, that will not happen. Be sure of that. We can't obviously predict what these groups may or may not do, but what we do know is they have no strategy, they have no popular support, they have no political program, and there is no sense in terms of what they did, particularly in terms of the bereavement and the grief and the loss to the families involved, at a time when we, perhaps for the first time in our history, and certainly for the first time in our recent history, where we have a more harmonious relationship between the people of Ireland and the people of Britain, and between the people who live within the island of Ireland. I said in my opening remarks that Sinn Féin was an Irish Republican Party. I want to see an end to British rule in my country. I hope God spares me that I will live to see that. And recently I called for a national conversation about what type of Ireland we want. And it's an invitation which we're extending to the Irish diaspora, or to anyone else who wants to be involved, to draw upon the American experience, to learn, and to try and nation build on our small island. And some of you who are students of Irish history will know that this year, in fact in the month of January, we celebrated the 90th anniversary of An Céid Dáil. The first Dáil that's referred to in English was the first and only Parliament of an all-Ireland nature, freely elected by the people of the island. And it followed after the 1916 proclamation and after the 1916 rising. And it was actually a popular ratification of the proclamation. And if you don't know about the proclamation, I would request that you just go on to Google and download the 1916 proclamation. It's a wonderful document, and all of these documents should be judged in their own time. But if you consider in 1916, women didn't have a vote. The first words in the proclamation are Irish men and Irish women. Now that's no big deal, but it does show that this was a progressive movement. It then goes on to outline the core values of republicanism, and in many ways they remain, I suppose the proclamation remains the mission statement of modern republicanism. And when the first Dáil met, they outlined a democratic programme. I'm just going to quote pieces of it. It declared that Irish society would be ruled in accordance with the principles of liberty, equality, and justice for all. That the first duty would be to make provision for the physical, mental, and spiritual well-being of the children, to secure that no child shall suffer hunger or cold from lack of food, clothing, or shelter, but all shall be provided with the means and facilities requisite for their proper education. It promised a system of social welfare that would ensure that the aged and the infirm would no longer be regarded as a burden, but rather entitled to the nation's gratitude and consideration. It said that the Republic had the duty to safeguard the health of the people. Now, this is 1918, and these are mighty words. This is 2009. And what we want to do is, in our time, is to find expression for these core values. And therefore, in New York, in June of this month, we're holding a conference. I think it's on the 13th of June, and you're all invited to come along. It'll be in the Hilton Hotel, and if people go on to the Sinn Féin website, you'll get some detail of that. And on the 27th of June, we're holding a conference in San Francisco. Now, these won't be one-off events. These will be part of a process of engagement. We understand, in terms of the role that President Clinton played, even though he became both intellectually and emotionally very connected with Ireland, it didn't start like that. There was a diaspora. There was an Irish American. There was a few people who had a bright idea who started it. So, anyone who thinks that it is not possible to unite Ireland, or that it is not possible to bring about an end to British rule on the island, think back to the first time I spoke here. If I had been able to predict that Martin McGuinness and Ian Paisley would be in government together, men with white coats would have been sent for. That's what's happened. If we had predicted that there would have been cessations and ceasefires, agreements, people living together, and notwithstanding the awfulness of recent times, I meet young people all the time who have no recollection whatsoever of conflict, who have never seen an armed British soldier, who have never visited a prison, who, unless they themselves were bereaved, never had to attend a funeral. So there's a whole generation of young people who have and deserve a wonderful future. And that would not have happened without the involvement of people here in the USA. So that was possible. And Irish unity and an end to British rule and the unity and harmony between orange and green is also possible. And we want to invite you to be part of helping to bring that about. We don't underestimate the challenges in trying to persuade unionism. And I think for many nationalists and Republicans, perhaps the shape that a united Ireland may take may be different from what we envisaged or what we dreamt about or what we thought about. But what matter? If the people of the island decide how our society should be shaped, and if we do it without outside interference, that means that we who want the Republican vision to be given reality can continue to work at that in a free, united Ireland. The British also have a big responsibility, the British government that is, and it is of a different kind. Its responsibility is to do the decent thing by Ireland. And even in benign times, and even with a benign government in London, the British government has no right whatsoever to be in my country. And what it has to do is to face up to its obligations and its responsibilities to usher in a new era, as it has already started, to usher in a new era for all of us. So sin ma couple of smuinte, that's my few thoughts on this evening's issues. I am, as I said at the beginning, delighted to be here. I hope we can have a good conversation. And, I'm not naive about the difficulties and sometimes the tedium of peacemaking, the incremental nature of it all. But there is a certainty of hope. A certainty of hope. If we think we're powerless, then we will be powerless. If we think we can do nothing, then we will do nothing. And every big thing that happens starts with a dream. every big thing that happens, it has to come in here first. Just starts with that little dream. Now, the trick is to make the dream come true. I think we can make the dream come true for the people who live in Ireland. Gora mila mila, Margaret. Thank you, everyone.
I had just said to Gerry, the answer was Clinton versus Dole. That's what it was in the mid-90s.
Bob Dole.
Bob Dole. Let's go to the audience right now. I'm sure there are lots of questions, and if you could please identify yourself, and we really would like to have crisp questions. Please.
Hi, I'm Ronan. I'm from Derry in Northern Ireland. I'm a junior at the college. I just have a question. If we accept that a united Ireland is only going to come about by democratic procedures, i.e. a majority of people in the north voting for it, what do you think are the kind of transformations that are going to have to occur that would persuade that majority to come about? So, and that's going to involve reaching out to unionists and essentially making them vote for United Ireland. And what do you think that Republicans can do to make that happen?
Okay, thank you.
Well, first of all, I think we have to have confidence both in ourselves and our own ability to be persuasive on these issues. But I also think that we have to have a confidence in unionism, just in those ordinary men and women who have a commitment to the union with Britain and who have never seriously considered anything else. So there needs to be proactive listening. There needs also to be, in a city like Derry, for example, where there's a very, very clear nationalist majority. That's the closest at this time the unionist people of Derry will get to know what it would like to be to live in a united Ireland. So we have to be really pragmatic and magnanimous to ensure that unionism has ownership. We also have to tackle sectarianism head on. Sectarianism is a disease, it's a second cousin of racism. It's deeply embedded. And increasingly Sinn Féin are involved in outreach with unionists, with the Orange Lodges, with community groups, with women's organisations, as well as with the political parties. And in the time of economic recession and economic downturn, it is very clear, as it has been for a very long time, that there is no difference in the working, living, and social conditions of many disadvantaged unionists. No difference between their conditions and the conditions of people on the nationalist side. And we have to try and build alliances to tackle all of that. So it will be an ongoing incremental process. There'll be big picture moments like when Ian Paisley went to the Battle of the Boyne site with the Taoiseach, and there will be small picture moments. For example, on the back of those attacks, the Mayor of Belfast, Tom Harty, the Sinn Féin Mayor, invited the Loyalist representatives into the City Hall to sit down and to ensure that there was calm and that there was no reaction from loyalism. So it's small but important, significant, symbolic, genuine outreach like that on the small scale and on the bigger scale. Thanks, Ronan, for your question.
Might I just ask one brief question also?
Well, I prefer we got a big line. If you don't mind, we're going to move on. Please, sir. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Nick Fair. I'm a master's student at Harvard Graduate School of Education, and I'm from Scotland. Given how much trouble a small group of armed men, and as you say, it normally is men, can cause anywhere in the world, can I ask you how robust you think Northern Ireland's new political architecture is against small groups of disparate Republicans, even if they have no strategy, no popular support, and relatively little funding?
Thank you very much.
Well, I think the answer to the question lies in the fact that Martin McGuinness are standing shoulder to shoulder and are receiving enormous public approval for what they are doing. And I think it also lies in need for this to be pursued as a policing matter. These people need to be tackled democratically, peacefully, and in a very open way. So, I mean, I have said to Gordon Brown that we don't want any return to British covert operations. Let the PSNI, who are accountable, deal with all of this. And we who have leadership responsibilities will on the ground do our best. So the short answer to your question is that I think the political institutions will endure and prevail despite these incidents.
And if I may just add one footnote, and that is, I think the people of Northern Ireland also back that very, very strongly and its leadership in that regard. Sir.
Hi, I'm Frank Murphy. I'm a member of the diaspora. My mother's from Galway. I just finished reading Making Peace by George Mitchell, and it said during that time you and Martin McGuinness never spoke directly to one another. Are you speaking yet?
Well, it's not me and Martin McGuinness. And in fact, we never stopped talking to each other.
Who was it he said you never spoke with?
Well, the unionists had a position during the Good Friday Agreement negotiations of not talking to us. It isn't that we had a position of not talking to them. In fact, if you go back over the history of the Sinn Féin peace strategy, one of the key principles in it is the need for dialogue. So our position was always to dialogue. The unionist had a position against it. David Trimble is no longer active in Northern politics, and that maybe is the answer to that question.
Okay. And my apologies, let's go up top here, please.
Hi, my name is Ashraf. I am a mid-career student here at the Kennedy School, originally from Egypt. And I'm wondering what lessons learned from your experience are relevant to the Palestinian-Israeli peace process that are either not being applied or not being applied well.
Thank you.
I don't think any of the methods used in the Irish peace process are being employed in the Middle East at all. I don't think any of them. And I spent an hour or so with George Mitchell this week, and I wish him well in his mission in that in that region. I think it is an international shame that that conflict continues. I think the international community and the government of the United States has to face up to its responsibilities on these matters in the same way as it needed the international community to assist with our process. The people of Israel deserve help to persuade them that their security is inextricably linked with the security of the Palestinian people, and vice versa, that you cannot bomb people out of a state of Israel and you cannot bomb people out of a state of Palestine. The two of them are linked together, and the international community, I think, has a very, very clear duty to help bring that about.
Let's go here, sir.
Thank you. Emmanuel Hooper, I do research on global intelligence in terms of equal policy. I want to ask you a question. Having known...
Who are you? Did you introduce yourself?
Yes, Emmanuel Hooper.
Thank you.
Yeah. I had a friend, John Donaldson, who was killed by an IRA 1978. I was in Ireland. I visited. He's actually an Irishman, a lawyer. And the IRA apologized after the fact. Now, given these many innocent Irish people died, not British, but Irish, what lesson would you pass on to the next generation who want to achieve the peace process? What is the kind of compensation and justice? Because obviously, I'm sure you don't agree with that kind of innocent people dying.
Thank you.
Well, in every war, the innocent die. And the way to prevent that is to ensure that there is no war. And while that might sound naive, I would like to think in terms of the remarks that I made here today and the way I tried to set a context. There is no reason why there ever needs to be any person, combatant or innocent civilian, killed or injured in Ireland as a result of political violence. No reason whatsoever. And all of us have a duty to not just condemn or denounce or repudiate violent actions, but to build the alternative and come in and support the political dispensation and the political process.
Let's go over here, and then we will come back here, okay?
I'm Ed Charles. I'm actually a union leader here. Family's from Black Lion, Cavan. It's, I was actually helped your campaign in '88. And during it, there was a thing about unemployment. There was a niche of when unemployment went up in the unionist areas, you actually recruited some Protestants. And there was an analogy that you all had with the ANC. When unemployment went up in South Africa amongst the whites, a lot of them joined the ANC. I was wondering with this economic downturn, and unemployment, imagine going high in Belfast and in the north, if that fact is also happening where some of the unionists are now looking and you're recruiting some of the Protestants.
Thank you.
Well, I'll answer your question in a more general way. Irish unity makes economic sense. And at the height of the Celtic Tiger prosperity, the unionists recognised that. The business classes recognised that. The notion of a single island economy, you know, on such a small landmass. The island of Ireland is about the size of the state of Maine, and we don't even have 6 million people. So to have two competing administrations and to have competition with all the sectors is just a nonsense. So unionism is quite hard-nosed, and at the working class level, as I said earlier, there is no economic bonus any longer for particularly unionist working class people. When Ireland was partitioned, it was no accident that the most prosperous industrialised part of the island remained under British control. That's where the shipyards were, that's where all of the manufacturing base on the island was. That's no longer the case. And if you examine, you know, for example, you know, and sometimes this is told as a joke, there was a big scare some years ago with a bovine disease. It was mad cow disease. Ian Paisley declared, this was a scare in Britain, that our cows were not British. That we had Irish cows. Now, there was a scare there recently with food produce as well. And the Minister of Agriculture, who was a Sinn Féin minister, with the support of her unionist fellow cabinet ministers, brought about Fortress Ireland. So in all of these approaches, whether it's health, whether it's the economy, whether it's agriculture, whether it's energy, or whether it's in the poorer disadvantaged neighbourhoods where people are feeling the bite of the economic recession, all the common sense is that we take control of our own destinies and that we work things out on an all-Ireland basis.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to you, sir.
My name is Rich Praga, retired from Dun & Bradstreet, and I am going on vacation soon. So my first question is Ireland a good place to travel? And I have a second question along with that.
Ask your second question now.
Okay. When I was growing up, my hero was John F. Kennedy, and he was sorely missed after his passing. My question is, in Ireland, is he missed more from the United States in Ireland, or is John F. Kennedy missed in Ireland more or less?
Okay, thank you.
Well, there was a time when in most households of a Catholic nature there was a photograph of the Pope and a photograph of John F. Kennedy. I'm reading, I admire the Kennedys greatly, not just John Kennedy, but his brother Robert, who I've been reading a lot of his work, and of course Teddy Kennedy, who is ill at the moment, was a champion of both the Irish cause and also a champion here for people in this part of the world. So I can't answer your question directly as to where he is most missed. You should come to Ireland. be mindful that it's wet.
But it's beautiful.
But it's the reason why it's green, so there's a compensation. Bring wet gear and enjoy yourself. And come north.
We go up here, sir.
Hi, thank you for coming. My name is Mark. David Shaler, a former MI5 agent, said that on at least 2 occasions, British intelligence knew of forewarning of an IRA attack. Has there been any implication that this latest attack could have been stopped? And also, the Lisbon Treaty, can you give us an update on that and what your stance is on that?
I'll take the second one first. We opposed the Lisbon Treaty. We thought it was bad for Ireland. We opposed it on fairly sound ground because we read it. The Taoiseach confessed to not having read it, which is always a mistake. The Taoiseach and the Irish government are off negotiating with their European partners. If they bring back a new treaty which deals with the issues which the electorate defeated, you may be aware that the electorate voted down the Lisbon Treaty. But if they bring back a new treaty, then of course we're duty bound to support it. If they don't, and I see no evidence at this point that they are going to bring back a new treaty, and we need a new treaty for new times. Lisbon Treaty's been 10 years in the making. You know, that we're living in an entirely new global situation and an entirely different situation. So if it doesn't fit the needs, then Sinn Féin will oppose it again. And I actually think it's insulting to Irish people if the government brings back the same treaty. You know, it's undemocratic. In terms of your first question, no, there is no evidence that I know of, and I've never heard any suggestion that there was any covert British involvement in those recent killings. Of course, it is a matter of historical fact that MI5 have been involved, and that's why there is the need, as part of the ongoing peace process, to have truth around collusion, which is the involvement of British agencies, particularly with loyalist agencies. And you know, there are big challenges here for the British government which it has yet to meet. For example, some of the big killings, I use that term advisedly because obviously every killing is significant, but the ones that were on television, like the attacks on the Milltown Cemetery, which was Stone, and some of you may have seen it on TV, other such incidents, they were used. They used weapons which were brought in from the old apartheid regime by MI5. Pat Finucane, and you know, and this is a famous law school apart from anything else, Harvard. Pat Finucane was a human rights lawyer. He was shot dead. I went to the same school as him, and he believed in the law. He actually believed that you could use the law to bring about equality and bring about people's rights. The person who shot him dead was a British agent. The person who did the intelligence was a British agent. The person who supplied the weapon was a British agent. So there's a whole lid that needs lifted of British government involvement in order that families have truth and that there can be reconciliation and people can leave it behind them. Thank you.
Let's go here, please.
Gonzalo Fanjul. I am a student here in the Kennedy School. I come from Spain, where we still suffer violence and fear in the Basque Country. And we went through a very frustrating peace process last year, and a failed peace process. And I think that many of us resent the fact that there was no Gerry Adams in the independentist Basque movement. And I wonder if you could share with us any lesson that we could learn from the Irish experience in terms of getting out of this situation.
Thank you.
Well, first of all, I wouldn't give up hope. It is my view that there are people within the Basque independence movement who want to see a peace process reinstated. And Sinn Féin have been working with that process for some time. And clearly it's very, very difficult for people in the Spanish state and also in the Basque Country itself. But, you know, we don't think we have any special lessons to teach anyone. We do think there are broad principles which can be employed and perhaps amended slightly to meet the peculiarities of the different conflicts. So, Martin McGuinness was in Iraq, he was in Baghdad, he was with the Tamil Tigers and the government in Sri Lanka. I have worked, as I've said, with the people in the Spanish state and in the Basque country. I've been in the Middle East. I intend to go to the Middle East again. Jerry Kelly, a close colleague, is just back from the Philippines, where he went with Jonathan Powell, who was Tony Blair's chief of staff. So we're willing, insofar as we can make a positive contribution to help. And I do believe, I firmly believe, that the dilemma facing the people from your country can be resolved. International community has a role to play, the Spanish government has a role to play, and the Basque leaders have a role to play. But I'm certain I know a fair bit about it, and I'm certain that it can be put together and that a peace process can work in that region also.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name's Seth Bannon. I'm an undergraduate at the university. First of all, thank you for coming. My question is sort of a follow-up of one asked before. Sinn Féin was incredibly successful in gaining recognition within the International Court of Public Opinion as a legitimate political party. And so what advice would you have to militant political groups like Hezbollah or Hamas that seek to gain that recognition?
Well, it's again, I'm loath to think that there are any special lessons we can teach anyone. In this modern age, there are very few liberation struggles, if any at all, which will be won by guns. And therefore, it is crucially important that leaders, even though they may function in dreadful conditions, and we who live in the Western world, with respect, unless we've travelled to these regions, we just don't have any idea of the conditions and the tribulations and the hardships which people endure. And even progressive Westerners, we tend to think that we're the world, and we're not. We're not. And these different ethnic and religious and cultural groupings and thoughts and tendencies are no better or no worse than ours. So rather than try to teach the groups who may be engaged in struggle and who may be terrorist groups, so-called, I would rather think that we can engage with people like yourselves and try and open up eyes to what we can do. And back to the story of John Deere. Who would have thought that Barack Obama was going to get elected? Who would have put money on it? Change is always possible if people want to bring it about. But Barack Obama will come, and Barack Obama will go, and his success will be in how many people have been mobilized in trying to ensure that we live in a better in a better world. So I don't have any here in Harvard any special advice to give to these other groups, but I do have a huge amount of advice to give to the establishment. When I came here 15 years ago, my voice could not be broadcast on the British television. By very dint of coming here, that became a matter of ridicule. Apart from the fact that the actors' voices were a big improvement on my own dulcet tones. The need for dialogue, the need for proactive listening, the need to be open to other people's ideas, the need to be non-prescriptive in terms of how they are represented and so on. They're all lessons that we can all learn, and then through wonderful institutions like this, with young people coming out of these institutions to be leaders, to have a world view. I think that's where the lessons lie. And thanks for your question.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. My name is Simon Hull. I'm a second-year master's student at Harvard Divinity School. My question is, how would you teach history to Catholic school children in Northern Ireland in a way that supports peace-building efforts rather than undermining them?
The same as I would teach history to Protestant, Islamic, Muslim, and pagan school children. History, someone famously said, is written by the victors. And you see, the Irish are not yet at the point where we're starting to make our own history. But we haven't had an Irish history. We have an Anglo-Irish history for as long as the conquest. So there can be something very liberating about actually being involved in a process which will shape a better Ireland. I do think that, and it's different in America, but in Ireland, in the north anyway, and in the south as well to a large degree, people aren't taught history. At that primary school level, it isn't taught. I mean, there are big phases of our history which are just airbrushed out. I mean, people aren't taught about the Civil War, they aren't taught about the treaty, they aren't taught about partition. So people end up with a skewed view of history and with an incomplete sense of history. And ignorance, as we all know, was a very, very dangerous breeding ground for all sorts of other difficulties. So let's write our own history. I also believe I got first interested in history with a very, very good teacher called Dick Dinan. His name, interestingly enough, his nickname was Dirty Dick, but that's another story. But he reduced it because I was at school and the history was all about big people and about generals and about big events. And he taught us about small events, about small people, about where the street that our school was in got its name, about where the city that I lived in got its name, about events that involved working women in the linen mills, about events which involved social history. And that there is a flourishing and a flowering of local history projects right across the island of Ireland. And I'll finish in this, but most people don't know that the founders of Irish republicanism were mostly Protestant. I mean, the United Irish movement was mostly Protestant leaders. All the famous iconic figures were Presbyterians or Church of Ireland. And that's one of the term Fenian is used as a derogatory term. But the first Fenians were actually Presbyterians. So I don't want to waffle on. I don't want to be talking for too long. I just think that this whole issue of history is a crucially important one, and it's time we wrote our own. And that's why we're inviting people into this big project of what type of Ireland we want to live in, so that we can shape it. We can have a conversation, and we can try and shape that ourselves.
We're going to take two more questions. We're going to take yours, and we're going to take yours, and then we're going to close. Yes.
My name is Tom Hadfield. I'm a recent graduate from the college. Martin McGuinness specifically and historically used the phrase traitors to Ireland to describe the perpetrators of the recent killings. And many commentators have speculated why you might have refused to use this phrase. I wonder if you could clarify whether you believe the perpetrators are traitors to Ireland, and if not, why you've refused to say so.
Well, I agree with Martin.
Great.
Shouldn't I?
Okay, should we go to the next question? Yes. Please.
Yes. I'm Christian Newis. I was a student of history. I was a history major in college. I graduated from from the University of Massachusetts with a degree in history, with a BA in history. One question. Do you know if and when Ireland will ever be reunited? When the British will ever get out of Northern Ireland for good, and Ireland will be reunited, Northern Ireland will be reunited with the Republic of Ireland?
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, as soon as possible. I don't know. I can't put a date on it, and I've always refrained from putting a date on it. People are tempted by the notion of the 100th anniversary of the 1916 Rising, the 2016. But, you know, Wolfe Tone, I mentioned the great Protestant Republican leaders. One of them, the founder of Irish Republicanism, Theobald Wolfe Tone, I think we're back with Tone. Tone talked about forging a unity of Catholic, Protestant, and dissenter, and that's what we're about. And I certainly think that we can, in our own time, people of my age, in our own time, that we can shape and live in a united Ireland. It won't happen because it's right, because if there was right in it, we would have had it a long time ago. It won't happen because it's inevitable, because these occurrences are never inevitable. It'll happen because we want it. And it'll happen because we are prepared to work towards it and to be intelligent and smart and inclusive and magnanimous in how we shape it. And I mean, I come back to what I said earlier. There's a role for everyone in this task. And especially, I was joking, I said a few words in Irish at the beginning of my remarks here tonight. I was joking with the Irish people here. I can think of nothing better. If my grandparents or great-grandparents couldn't live in Ireland, if for economic reasons or because of political upheaval, they were exiled, they were banned, they had to come here to make a living, I can think of nothing better than when Irish unity is brought about, to know that I played a role in that. So I would invite everybody to play a role, even a small role. Bobby Sands famously said that everybody has a part. Nothing's too big or too small. And, you know, Paula has no Irish ancestry, but she came and
Sure about that.
well, she wishes she had. But people come, wonderful people from all parts of the world, from different backgrounds, and they're very taken by the possibilities. And if I may say so respectfully, this is the most successful US foreign policy issue we've had in the last 30 years. So the answer to the question can be answered by us. And let's make it an endeavour, as I say, even if it only means going on to a website and picking up information, even if it only means just engaging with someone else. And just don't let anybody tell you that war is inevitable. It is not. It is not. It can be stopped. And there is a responsibility. It just beggars belief that here we are in economic meltdown. Does anybody stop putting money into armaments? Billions upon billions upon billions. And we are all worried now because, understandably, we may lose homes or we may lose jobs. There are people in the world who earn less than $1 a day. And the time that I have been speaking here tonight, there are thousands of babies who have died from preventable diseases. 50 cents will supply saline mix to save the lives of babies. In the time that I've been speaking, as many as 10 or 15,000 children have died. So there are issues which we all need to be part of. And I just think that we have opportunities to make a difference. And I don't want to be preaching to anyone, so I just thank you all for your. Those of us who are not Irish American millionaires or Irish American.
I think he.
Find your space. Find your space. Find your space. Find your campaign. Find your point of contact, and help the process. And just to conclude, just thanks for your attention. I've just to get your sympathy, I've had a blinding migraine headache, so thanks for your attention. Thank you, Paula, for moderating, and good luck to all of you, and especially the young people here. Good luck to all of you in the future. Gora míle maith agam.
I don't know if I'll get a word with the audience because they're all leaving.